I want to show you this video of this 2-pound slide hammer and puller set. It's more than just a smaller hammer on this than there is with the slide hammer and bearing set, puller set that I showed once before. A couple people were probably upset that I didn't really show how to use it, so thought I might just run down both of these and just demonstrate how you can use it. It's kind of difficult when I am using it to try to set up the camera to where I can actually get a point of view of where I'm using it. So I did try it, but the camera bounces all over the place just trying to set it close to it. So it's kind of annoying to watch. So let's take a look inside here. This is the 2-pound hammer, and you've got multiple attachments for this with this one. Most of them weren't very useful. I tried this one here to get the inside of a bearing, like this one. You tighten that rod down on that, and it spreads those open to hold that, but it didn't stay very well. That bearing was pretty tough to get out. So looking inside this other bearing set that I showed you before, this one wasn't a very good fit for it. So you can see that's it didn't feel like it wanted to slide in there very good when the bearing was sitting in there. It's hard to do it. Hold this. You hear that snap. I pushed that one all the way through. That's how I eventually got that one out. Now, some of these bearings are kind of tough to get all the way through because some of them sit so flush to something that you can't get that lip through there. And once you get that lip through there, you want to tighten it down. And tighten that with a wrench. That needs to be really tight, and to pry open the outer portion of this puller. Alright, so there's one way I use this. You're going to have to back this off to get it back out. Okay, so when I first tried that, I just was afraid to try it too far. So I ended up using this other attachment with this 2-inch hammer. This did not work, but I did have to use this attachment. And you've got these pins inside here. Let me just show you. So you've got these pins here and here, and I used, I think I tried all 4 of them. These 2 match. So I put them together here. Now, I did have to use the 2-pound hammer, and this 2-pound hammer screws on the end here. Okay, it's pretty obvious. So anyway, this is one way I come up with trying to get the actuator piece for the clutch. Oh, that bearing is on there. And what I ended up having to do was put this, it's a 11/32 wrench in that groove. Then I use this puller. Use this puller right here underneath it. It's kind of hard to hold it up, but anyways, you get the idea. I have the puller pulling against this wrench, which is sitting in the groove here, and that's how I got it up enough, because I couldn't get the seal out. But I eventually got the seal up enough that I could pry it out. So I'm going to get a new one. Obviously I should get a new one anyway, but so I had to pry that out. Once I got the seal broke loose and high enough to pry it out, then it was easy to get this out. But it was kind of tough. I didn't have any other idea. I tried this other attachment, which comes in this kit, which looks like this, but it didn't fit, and didn't really feel like modifying this to make it fit. So I come up with that wrench and that other piece. So it's a pretty nice set. Actually, I haven't had this that long. This is the first time I actually used it. So I don't know. I'm sure it'll come in handy for other times. For the most part, I use this more than anything. And I guess I'm just going to show you maybe a couple different ways that you can pull these bearings out. So I use just pretty well every size when taking anything apart. Now I've taken apart KFX 400 four-wheeler, YZF 250, a couple different years there, and a YZ 125, YZ 85, also 65. So these different attachments, I'll be able to get all the bearings out. And the reason I'm pulling all the bearings is for vapor blasting. So you have to pull every single bearing, even some smaller bearings that are hard to get. Now this is the clutch actuator bearing. These are really hard to get out. So what I even do before I start pulling any bearings is I'm going to put the part in the oven. And I mean my powder coat oven. It gets hot enough that it heats everything up to, a lot of times the bearings just drop out on a piece a rack that I've got in there, where I can either hang the part from it if there's a crank on it, and I've got something down below it to catch it so it doesn't really bounce around and get tore up or damaged in any way. So I'll start out heating them up with the bearings in them, get all the oil out. Of course, you'll make a lot of smoke. And of course, by this point, I've already split the case. So a lot of times the crank will be on one side or the other of the case when you split it. So anyways, sometimes you got to get a little creative with these bearings and these pullers. Now this one's obviously way too big. Well, it's not way too big, but by the time you squeeze this down, now these are hard to get. This particular bearing you can't get all the way through there because of a lip that it sits on or something like that. I know what I had to do was squeeze it out right on this very top. And it's kind of hard to see down in there when you're doing it, but it's just on that edge right there. Now if you don't pull real hard and get too aggressive with it, after you pull it out of the oven, it should come out fairly smooth, depending on what you're working on, I'm sure. In this case, I'm talking about a four-wheeler or a dirt bike motor. So I had to apply this same way to two different bearings. This was one of them. And, well, I think it was this one. It's probably the last one I used. It's still tightened up. But I think I had to do the same thing right here on this one and just get the lip of that thing. Now I had this screwed all the way in just to catch it just right. Yeah. Now I gotta get a wrench on it. Once you get it so far up, you want to get a wrench on it and tighten it down. But you get the idea. That's obviously not the best way to do it, but sometimes all these need just a little bit of pull once you've had them in the oven. Sometimes they won't just drop out on their own. All it needs is just a little yank. I showed you an example of the small one. Now this one, let me see I'll show you the size difference there. So you can see how much I can't really see that well. You can kind of see how much that actually expands. So that's what I used. Now this is the second largest one out of that set, and I'll use all four. Sometimes you'll have a crank bearing still stuck in the case, it won't come out, and this one does fit. Same principle. I didn't mention, I guess, anywhere you can go all the way through to get this thing to grab, then definitely go all the way through and work from the bottom side rather than taking a chance on messing up inside here. I've had bearings that I couldn't get a hold of like this through the back, and I just had to really squeeze it in on the inside and just work it gently. It came out. And again, this is with putting heat on the part, just trying to pull it out. I mean, unless it's absolutely necessary that I have to avoid the heat, then you know, I'd rather not though. I'd rather just heat up around the bearing and then pull on these things, because then you're not beating on them as hard, or in this case pulling on it. And I know somebody might complain that I still didn't really demonstrate the whole tool, but I think you get the idea really. Just don't be afraid to tighten them down. You want them to get a good grip. You don't want them ripping through the inner diameter of the bearing where a shaft might be going through at. Just try to use good judgment to avoid some damage on a bearing. But other than that, these two bearing puller sets, I think they're pretty awesome. I've broken down several bikes, everything, the wheels, the motor, anything that's got a bearing, I've probably used this puller. Now, before I got this first set, the big set, I just used a punch for most everything I could get, and I did okay with that. But I didn't really need this puller set until I really started splitting cases and vapor blasting or vapor honing, whatever you want to call it, the cases and the other components, like the head. I've done the cylinders and just pretty well everything. Some of the motors have turned out really, really nice. Now this is the KFX 400 motor. I'm about to be vapor blasting this one. Take a look at how nasty this thing is. It's terrible. Owner never cleaned it, I swear. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, she's pretty dirty. But it's going to look nice. I think it's going to clean it up really well in the vapor blaster. I'm just going to have to scrape some of this stuff off first. The only place I really had a problem with bearings, you can see I've got that. Let me split this part. So I've got that piece of silicone from the other side. And there's a bearing in here I could not get out. Tried heating it up and trying to see if it'll just fall out. I didn't want to damage the bearing getting it out and not being able to pull it. So I've got it plugged up. I've had to do this a time or two, and it's specifically on these clutch actuator bearings. That's like the hardest ones to get out. But if you got some silicone plugs, you can manage something here. Now I've got a plug inside of a plug, and this is just the outer plug that just to help protect it a little more. The bearing is actually underneath there. But I've also got the whole shaft plugged up. I know it's going to get some glass bead in it, but I'm confident I can get it all cleaned out. I've had to do it before. Alright, we'll check back. I'm going to be vapor blasting this 400 case and putting it back together. And it might be a while before this whole project is done, but check back to see the results. And I've got the front and back wheel for that YZ85 now, and I've got them powder coated and just about ready to put on. And I got to get this out of the way so I can start on the 85 motor. So I've got lots to do. I better stop talking and get to it, or I'm never going to get it done. Thanks.